Daddy, you scared me. Victor winced from pain but smiled anyway, his hand brushing her hair. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'll try not to do that again. I stood aside, watching the moment like an outsider peering through glass. A family nearly broken, somehow piecing itself back together. When Molly finally noticed me, she reached for my hand. Auntie Claire, Daddy's awake. I see that, I said, kneeling beside her. Now you can tell him about the birds we saw last week. Her face lit up. For a few minutes, the room filled with small, ordinary joy. Stories about pigeons and drawings and the silly names she gave them. But beneath it, something in me trembled. Watching them, I felt both warmth and loneliness, as though I were holding a candle in a room full of shadows. When I left, the afternoon light spilled across the hospital's courtyard. I took a long breath, grateful yet heavy. My phone buzzed. Hung. Where are you? At the hospital, I said. I know. His voice was controlled, too calm. Mother heard from one of her friends that you've been visiting a man there. Is it true? It's not like that. I didn't say it was, he replied. But people are talking. A pause stretched between us, fragile as glass. Hung, I said quietly. A man almost died. His daughter needed someone. I couldn't turn away. I understand, he said after a moment. But my mother doesn't. She thinks you're bringing shame to the family. I closed my eyes, fighting the heat rising in my chest. Does it matter more what she thinks or what's right? Claire. His tone softened, weary. I'm trying to keep the peace. Please don't make this harder. When the call ended, I stood in silence, the city's noise washing over me like static. I realized that sometimes doing what's right can still make you look wrong in the eyes of those who see only rules, not reasons. That evening when I returned home, the house was tense. Mrs. Nian was waiting in the living room, her face tight. So it's true, she said. You've been spending time with another man, at the hospital no less. I swallowed. He's not another man, he's a widower with a child. I'm only helping. Helping? She scoffed. That's what every woman says before ruining her own home. Mother, Hung interjected, his tone cautious. Please, but she cut him off. You've shamed this family enough, Claire. People are whispering. If you care about our name, you'll stop seeing him immediately. I stood still, my hands cold. If caring for a child brings shame, then I suppose I'm guilty. Her eyes widened, disbelief hardening into disdain. Such defiance. You forget whose roof you live under. Enough, Hung said, raising his voice for the first time. Mother, that's enough. She gasped softly, as if wounded by his tone. Then she turned to me, her voice trembling. You've turned my son against me. Congratulations. Before I could reply, she swept from the room. Hung looked at me helplessly. Why did you have to answer her like that? Because silence only feeds misunderstanding, I said, my voice breaking. I've stayed quiet for too long. He exhaled, rubbing his forehead. I know you mean well, but can't you just step back for a while? Step back, I repeated. From what? Being myself? We said nothing more that night. We slept back to back, the distance between us thick as fog. Days turned into weeks. Victor recovered slowly. He returned home, thinner but alive. Molly began smiling again, the dark circles under her eyes fading. I still visited sometimes, but briefly, mostly to bring groceries or check in on her studies. Once, as I left, Victor said, "You've done enough. You've given us more than kindness. Please, don't come if it causes you trouble." His words stung. "You're not a burden, Victor." He gave a sad smile. "Maybe not, but I can see the cost. I don't want gratitude to turn into gossip." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The afternoon light fell through the window in slanted bars, dust floating in gold silence. "I'll still visit Molly," I finally said. "She deserves that much." He nodded slowly. "Then thank you for everything." After that, I went less often, but I thought of them daily. At home, Hung became quieter. He worked longer hours, ate in silence, scrolled through his phone late into the night. Sometimes I caught him staring at me with an expression I couldn't read, half concern, half distance. "You've got it." One evening, as I prepared dinner, he said suddenly, "Claire, maybe we should move out, find our own place." I looked up, startled. "What about your mother?" "She'll manage. I can rent us an apartment closer to your work. Maybe we just need space." Relief and guilt collided in my chest. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "Yes, I think it'll help." We moved 2 weeks later. The apartment was small but bright, filled with the scent of new paint and possibility. For the first time, I felt a fragile peace, freedom wrapped in uncertainty. I decorated the space with small things, a vase of white lilies, a photo of my parents, and a single framed sketch Molly had given me. A house with doors this time, wide open. Life found a quiet rhythm again. I worked, cooked, sometimes visited Vivian at her dorm. Hung seemed lighter away from his mother's scrutiny. He even laughed again, though the laughter sometimes stopped short, as if something unsaid hung between us. One Sunday morning, he handed me an envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "Tickets." "Kikwas," he said, "for Da Nang. Just a weekend trip, we could use a break." I smiled, touched. "You planned this?" He shrugged. "Maybe I'm trying to be a better husband." That trip felt like breathing after holding it too long. We walked along the beach at dusk, the waves licking our feet. The ocean was vast, endless, just like the silence we were finally learning to fill with laughter. Sitting beside him on the sand, I thought maybe we could begin again. That maybe love wasn't something you found all at once, but something you rebuilt, patiently, after the storms. When we returned to Hanoi, I stopped by Linda's to bring Molly some gifts from the trip, a small seashell bracelet and a jar of sand. "She'll love these," Linda said warmly. "She talks about you often." "How is Victor?" "Better," she replied. "He's back at work, though still weak. He said he might move to a smaller city, something quieter for Molly." I felt an unexpected pang. "That's good." Linda looked at me closely. "You'll miss them, won't you?" I smiled faintly. "Yes, but maybe some people are only meant to pass through our lives, to remind us of something we forgot." When I left Linda's that evening, the sky was burning orange over the city. The air was thick with the smell of rain waiting to fall. I thought of all the things I had learned in those months, about love, kindness, misunderstanding, and the price of compassion. That night, as I lay beside home, listening to the hum of traffic outside our window, I whispered a quiet prayer, not for myself, but for everyone I'd crossed paths with, for my father's peace, for Molly's laughter, for Victor's healing, and for Hung's heart to find me again, truly. Because love, I realized, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the quiet act of staying when the world tells you to leave. And for the first time in months, I fell asleep without the ache of guilt pressing against my ribs. The months that followed felt deceptively calm, like a river that looked still on the surface but carried unseen currents beneath. Hung and I lived quietly, away from the tension of his mother's house. We both worked long hours, shared simple meals, and spoke gently to each other, as though we were afraid that one wrong word might shatter what little peace we had managed to build. Yet even in the silence, I felt something loosening between us. A distance that wasn't angry, just empty. Every evening, I waited for the sound of his key turning in the door. Sometimes it came early, sometimes late, and sometimes not at all. "A business meeting," he would text. "Don't wait for me." I told myself it was nothing, that he was simply busy. But the unease crept in quietly, settling inside me like dust I couldn't brush away. One rainy night, while I was drying my hair, my phone lit up. A message from an unknown number. "He's with me tonight. Stop pretending you don't know." My heart stilled. I stared at the words until the screen dimmed. For a long time, I didn't move. Then with trembling fingers, I typed back, "Who is this?" No reply came. I tried to steady my breath. Maybe it was spam, maybe a cruel joke. But deep down, I already knew who it was. When Hung came home later that night, I watched him quietly as he removed his coat. His shirt smelled faintly of perfume, not mine. "Long meeting?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He nodded, avoiding my eyes. "Yes, the branch audit ran late." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But something in the way he didn't meet my gaze, something in the tired, practiced tone of his voice, told me the truth. Still, I said nothing, because silence was easier than shattering the fragile peace we'd built. 2 weeks later, fate decided I'd had enough of pretending. It was a Saturday morning. Hung said he was meeting a client at a cafe near the bank. After he left, I went to the market, bought fresh vegetables, and stopped by a bookstore nearby. When I walked out, the sky had begun to drizzle. I hurried toward the bus stop, passing by pure chance the cafe he had mentioned. Through the window, I saw him. He wasn't with a client. He was with her. The woman sat across from him, smiling shyly, her hand resting on her stomach. He leaned in slightly, speaking in that gentle tone I once knew so well. And then, he reached across the table and brushed a lock of hair from her face. The sight didn't explode inside me. It hollowed me out instead. Quiet, cold, final. I didn't go inside. I didn't confront him. I simply turned around and walked into the rain, my umbrella forgotten, my body moving as though it belonged to someone else. When I got home, the apartment felt unfamiliar, like a place I had been only borrowing. I sat on the floor staring at the ring on my finger. That night, he came home late again. "Why are you wet?" he asked, noticing the damp umbrella by the door. "It rained," I said simply. He nodded, took off his shoes, and walked past me. He didn't notice the way my hands were trembling. Days passed. Neither of us spoke about the growing silence. He left early, returned late, and I stopped asking questions. But one evening, as I folded laundry, I saw it, a small pink ribbon, caught in the pocket of his trousers. The kind that might belong to a little girl, or to a newborn gift bag. Something inside me broke. That night, I sat by the window long after he'd fallen asleep. Outside, the city buzzed faintly. Cars, rain, and distant laughter. I thought of my father, of his words before he died. "Find a man who will love you with all his heart." I whispered into the dark, "Dad, I tried." The next morning, I made breakfast as usual. Boiled eggs, warm soy milk, a plate of sliced mango. He came out half-dressed, looking distracted. "Morning," I said quietly. "Morning?" He sat, checked his phone, barely glanced up. "Hung?" I began softly. "Can we talk tonight? I need to tell you something important." He hesitated. "I might be late. We're finalizing a project." "Then tomorrow," I said, thoughts. He nodded absently. "Sure." When he left, I packed a small suitcase. Just enough for a week. Clothes, a few photos, my father's old scarf, and a notebook filled with half-written thoughts. I didn't leave right away. I waited until evening, when the city lights turned gold and the air outside the window felt heavy with goodbye. Then I wrote a letter. Home. I used to think love meant endurance. That if I stayed, if I forgave enough, things would heal. But I see now, some wounds don't heal by staying silent. You once said you wanted peace. I hope you find it, but peace built on lies will always collapse. Don't worry about me. I'm going home for a while. Tell your mother I wish her well. Goodbye. Casey. I left the letter on his pillow and quietly locked the door behind me. The bus ride back to my hometown was long. The fields outside blurred into streaks of green and gold. My mother opened the door in surprise when she saw me standing there. "Chi, why didn't you tell me you were coming?" "I just needed to be home," I said. She looked at my face for a long moment before pulling me into her arms. "Then stay as long as you need, Khan." That night, lying in my old room, I felt something I hadn't in years. Safety. The smell of wood smoke, the hum of cicadas, the sound of my mother's gentle breathing in the next room. For the first time in a long while, I cried without holding back. The next morning, I went to the riverbank where my father used to fish. The mist still curled over the water, soft and silver. I knelt, whispered to the wind. "I'm sorry, Dad, I couldn't keep the promise." But in the stillness, I felt a strange calm. Maybe the promise wasn't about keeping a marriage. It was about keeping my heart alive, not letting it die in silence. Weeks passed. I started tutoring again at a local school. The children's laughter filled the empty hours. Sometimes I visited the small graveyard behind the temple where my father rested, bringing wildflowers. And then one afternoon, as I was walking home, I saw a familiar figure standing near the gate. Linda. "Chi," she called, running toward me. "I've been looking for you." I smiled, surprised. "Linda, how did you find this place?" "Your sister told me. I came with Victor and Molly. We're visiting some schools here for a charity project." Behind her, Molly waved excitedly. "Auntie Chi." I knelt to hug her, feeling the small warmth of her arms around my neck. Victor approached, thinner but healthy. "It's good to see you," he said quietly. "You too," I replied. There was a silence between us. Comfortable this time. Then he said, "Molly wanted to thank you in person." "I didn't do anything special," I said. He smiled. "You did more than you know." Later, as we sat by the river, Molly ran ahead chasing dragonflies. The sunlight shimmered on the water, and for the first time in months, I felt light again. Victor turned to me. "You seem freer." "I think I finally stopped trying to fix everything," I said. "Sometimes, peace isn't in holding on. It's in letting go." He nodded. "I understand that more than you think." As the afternoon faded, he said, "We're moving to Dalat next month, but if you ever visit, you'll always have a place with us." I smiled, eyes misting. Thank you, take care of her. He glanced at Molly, then back at me. You take care of yourself too. When they left, I stood by the river until the sun dipped below the hills. The water glowed red gold, like fire melting into memory. And in that quiet hour, I realized something simple yet profound. Sometimes, the love we fight hardest to keep isn't meant to stay. It's meant to teach us how to begin again. When I returned to the city months later, autumn had already begun to settle in. The air was cooler, thinner, carrying that faint scent of dried leaves and rain that always reminded me of change. Hanoi looked the same, yet I was not. I rented a small apartment near the university where my sister Van was finishing her final year of medical school. It was nothing grand. One bedroom, a wooden table, a window that opened toward a noisy alley, but it was mine. It felt like breathing again after being held underwater too long. Van came over the next day, bringing a basket of fruit. Chi, are you really sure about this? She asked softly. You don't have to stay here alone. Come live with me. I smiled. It's better this way. I want to stand on my own feet again. She hesitated, then hugged me tightly. Just promise me you won't disappear again, okay? I promise, I said, though deep down I wasn't sure what I was promising anymore. Work found me soon after. One of my old colleagues from the export company called and said there was an opening in the communications department. I hesitated at first, afraid to face familiar places and people, but something inside me whispered, start again. On my first day back, the building seemed smaller, less intimidating. He and my old team leader met me at the entrance. Chi, you're back? Yes, I said with a small laugh. If you'll still have me. She smiled, a warmth in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Of course, you've always had a place here. Working again brought a rhythm to my days. Mornings filled with emails, reports, coffee cups half finished. Evenings spent walking home through streets glowing with yellow streetlights. I found comfort in routine, the ordinary kind of peace that doesn't ask for much. Every now and then, I thought of home. I wondered if he'd read my letter, if he'd moved on, if the woman truly stayed in his life. But I no longer felt anger, only a quiet, exhausted compassion for both of us. Some love stories, I realized, simply run out of breath. One afternoon, as I left work, I stopped by a small cafe on Doikon Street, the kind that hides behind tall bamboo plants, serving tea in old porcelain cups. I was flipping through my notebook when a voice broke through the hum of soft music. Excuse me, it said, is this seat taken? I looked up and froze. It was Vu. He looked different from the last time I'd seen him. Calmer, a few more lines at the corners of his eyes, but the same steady presence. Vu? He smiled slightly. It's really you, Chi. I gestured for him to sit. What are you doing here? I thought you were still abroad. I came back 2 months ago, he said, settling into the chair across from me. Mun's growing fast. She's in 3rd grade now. I smiled at that. How is she? She's happy, he said. Talks about you often. Says you're the nicest teacher she's ever had. That's sweet of her, I said, though my voice caught a little. I miss her too. Vu studied me quietly. And you? How have you been? I'm fine, I said, though it sounded unconvincing even to my own ears. He tilted his head slightly. You don't have to lie, you know. I laughed softly. Maybe not lying, just trying to sound brave. He looked down, tracing the rim of his teacup with one finger. I heard about your father. I'm sorry I wasn't there. Thank you, I said quietly. It's been a year, but it still feels fresh sometimes. He nodded, then added gently. And your husband? I hesitated. We're no longer together. Vu's expression didn't change, but something softened in his gaze. I see. There was a long silence. Outside, the rain began to fall, tapping gently against the window. I used to come here with Vi, he said suddenly, his voice low. She loved the jasmine tea. I looked at him, and for the first time I saw not just the man he was, but the grief he carried. It's strange, I said quietly, how life keeps circling us back to old places, as if to make sure we've learned something before we move on. He smiled faintly. Have you learned, Chi? I thought for a long time. Yes, I've learned that love isn't always a promise. It's sometimes just a presence. And when it's gone, you can't hate it for leaving. Vu nodded, his eyes thoughtful. Maybe that's what peace really is. The rain outside turned heavier, but the air between us felt lighter somehow. Not romantic, not nostalgic, just two souls quietly recognizing the same kind of ache. Before leaving, Vu said, I'd like to keep in touch, not for any reason, just to know you're okay. I smiled. I'd like that too. Over the next few months, we exchanged messages occasionally. Simple ones, about work, about life, about how Mun had joined a painting club at school. There was no pressure, no expectation, just warmth. One weekend, he invited Van and me to join a community health event his company was sponsoring in a nearby village. I hesitated, but agreed, mostly because Van insisted it would be good to get out of the city. The event was small but meaningful. We spent the morning distributing supplies, helping with free checkups, and reading stories to children. Mun clung to me the entire time, showing me her sketches. A girl standing under a tree, hair blowing in the wind. "Who's this?" I asked, smiling. "It's you," she said proudly. "You look peaceful now." Her words hit me like sunlight breaking through cloud. Later, as the day ended, Vu and I stood by the river, watching the orange light sink into the water. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Mun's so happy when you're around." "I'm happy too," I replied. "It's nice, being useful again." He looked at me, his voice softer than the wind. "You were never useless, Chi. You just needed to remember your own worth." For a moment, I couldn't speak. All I could do was smile and nod. When we returned to the city, I felt something new stirring inside me. Not love exactly, but the quiet possibility of it. Vu never crossed boundaries. He never made promises. He simply showed up, steady and kind, like the earth after a storm. One night, as I sat by my window, I wrote in my journal, "Healing isn't forgetting. It's remembering without bleeding. Some people enter your life to love you, some to teach you, and some to remind you that you still deserve to be loved again." The wind rustled through the open window, carrying the faint smell of rain. I closed my notebook, turned off the light, and for the first time in years, fell asleep smiling. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. There were still bills, long days, and quiet nights when I missed what could have been. But something within me had shifted. A gentle acceptance that everything, even pain, had its purpose. When Van graduated a few months later, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "You did it, Chi. You're happy again." And maybe she was right. Happiness no longer felt like fireworks. It felt like sitting by a river with people who mattered, like drinking tea in silence, like watching someone smile because of you. I looked at my sister, at the future stretching ahead, and thought, maybe this is what it means to start over. Not to erase the past, but to finally walk forward without its weight. And as the night breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of lilies and rain, I whispered a quiet prayer. "Thank you, Dad, I'm finally okay." Winter came quietly that year, wrapping the city in a pale gray calm. The trees along Guin Chi Tan Street stood bare, their branches trembling in the wind, and the smell of roasted chestnuts filled the air. Life had slowed into something softer, gentler even. I had begun to enjoy the silence of mornings, a cup of warm tea, the sound of rain against the glass, the city below waking up in slow motion. It felt strange to be content after so much chaos, but maybe that's how healing begins. Not with fireworks, but with stillness. I was still working at the same company, but now I handled communications for charity partnerships. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt meaningful. Every project reminded me of the people I'd met, families in small towns, children with hopeful eyes, and the quiet strength of kindness. One day, my manager told me we were partnering with an educational foundation to fund scholarships for underprivileged students. "You'll be coordinating with their lead sponsor," she said. "His name's Vu Tran. He's been very active in community work." I paused, startled. "Vu Tran?" She nodded. "Do you know him?" I smiled faintly. "Yes, we've met." Later that afternoon, I received his email confirming our collaboration. "It seems fate enjoys its little circles," he wrote at the end. I couldn't help but laugh. A week later, we met at the foundation's office to finalize the project. Vu was already there, sitting by the window, reviewing documents. He looked calm, as always, but there was something gentler in his expression, like time had softened the edges of his grief. "Chi," he greeted warmly, standing to shake my hand. "I didn't expect we'd work together again." "Neither did I replied. "But I suppose the universe enjoys reruns." He laughed, a quiet, genuine sound that filled the small office. "Maybe some stories deserve a second draft." We spent the morning reviewing budgets and proposals. But between spreadsheets and signatures, there were small pauses. Moments when our eyes met and the air seemed to hum with unspoken familiarity. When the meeting ended, Vu asked, "Would you like to have lunch together? It's been a while since we talked outside work." I hesitated, then nodded. All right. We walked to a nearby restaurant, a modest place serving hot pot and noodles. The steam from the pots fogged the windows, and the warmth felt comforting after the cold. As we ate, he spoke about Mun, how she was now in a new school learning piano, and that she still drew pictures of the sea. She remembers you, he said. She keeps that seashell bracelet you gave her. I smiled softly. She has a good heart, like her father. Vu looked down, stirring his soup. You give me too much credit. I've made my share of mistakes. Everyone has, I said, yet what matters is what we do with the time we have left. He met my gaze then, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. There was no rush, no need to name what was quietly forming between us. Something patient, something earned. Weeks passed, and our paths kept crossing. Meetings turned into casual coffees into long evening walks. Sometimes we talked about work, sometimes about the past, but often we simply walked in silence. Two people who didn't need to fill every space with words. It was during one of those walks, near West Lake, that Vu finally spoke what had been lingering for months. Chi, he began softly. When I lost Vi, I thought love was something I wasn't meant to feel again. And when I saw what you went through, I recognized that same silence in you. I stopped walking. The lake shimmered in the distance, reflecting the city lights. He continued, but maybe love doesn't die with people. Maybe it just waits, quietly, until we're ready to see it again. I looked at him, heart beating faster. Are you saying you found it again? He smiled gently. Maybe I'm saying I'm learning to. For a long moment, we stood there, the night wind brushing against our faces. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The answer lived quietly between us, in the way his eyes softened when he looked at me, in the peace that finally replaced the ache. When spring came, our foundation project launched successfully. We organized a ceremony to award scholarships to 20 students from rural provinces. The event was simple but heartfelt. As I stood on stage reading the closing speech, I saw Vu among the crowd, smiling proudly. After the ceremony, he approached with a bouquet of lilies, my father's favorite flower. You remembered, I said, touched. I listen, he replied with a small grin. Sometimes that's all love really is. We walked out together into the courtyard. The students were laughing, holding their certificates high, and somewhere nearby, a band was playing a soft melody on guitar. Vu turned to me, his voice low. Chi, I know you've been through too much to believe in promises, so I won't make one. But if you'll allow me, I'd like to stay, not as someone to fix you, but as someone to walk beside you. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The world seemed to blur around us, the music, the laughter, the scent of lilies. I reached for his hand, and for the first time in years, it didn't tremble. Then walk with me, I whispered. No promises, just truth. That night, I went home and opened my old journal. The pages still carried fragments of my past, grief, loneliness, prayers written in the dark. On the final page, I wrote, today, I learned that healing doesn't erase the scars. It teaches you how to live with them and still see beauty when the light hits just right. I closed the notebook and set it aside, feeling an unfamiliar stillness in my heart. Not emptiness, but peace. Months later, Vu and Mun invited me to their new home for dinner. The house was warm, filled with laughter and the smell of home-cooked food. Mun ran up to me with excitement, holding a drawing. Look, Auntie Chi, it's all of us. I looked at the picture. 3 figures under a cherry blossom tree. The smallest one had a bright pink dress and was holding both adults' hands. It's beautiful, I said softly. Mun grinned. Daddy said you make everything more beautiful. I glanced at Vu, who looked a little embarrassed, but his eyes were kind. She exaggerates, he said. No, I said, smiling, as she's just honest. After dinner, as Mun played in the garden, Vu and I stood by the doorway, watching the lights flicker. You know, he said, life's funny. We spend so long waiting for things to be perfect when really, peace was just about being honest. I nodded. About ourselves, about what we feel, about what we're ready for. He smiled. Are you ready, Chi? I turned toward him, the evening breeze brushing against my face, and for once, I didn't hesitate. Yes, I said, I am. Later that night, walking home, I looked up at the sky, a soft silver moon shining through drifting clouds. I thought of my father, of the years of silence, of the love I had lost and the one I had found, not through seeking, but through living. And in that quiet hour, I whispered a final prayer. Thank you for every ending that led me here, for every heartbreak that taught me gentleness, for every silence that led me back to my own voice. Then, smiling through the moonlight, I finally felt it. Not just peace, but freedom. Autumn returned again. The gentle kind that came with drifting golden leaves and cool wind humming through narrow alleys. 1 year had passed since the scholarship ceremony. 1 year since the day Vu and I began walking side by side without naming what it was. Our days found their rhythm like two rivers finally meeting. Sometimes we worked together on projects. Sometimes we shared dinners that turned into hours of conversation. Sometimes we simply sat in quiet, watching Mun draw. There was no rush, no declarations, only the steady unfolding of something true. But even peace, I learned, carries its own test. One morning, as I prepared to leave for work, Vu called. His voice was calm, but something in it made me pause. Chi, can we meet this evening? I need to tell you something important. I hesitated. Of course, is everything all right? Yes, he said after a beat. I just need your honesty tonight. The call ended, leaving me with a faint unease that followed me through the day. When evening came, we met at our usual cafe near West Lake, the same place where he'd once spoken about love waiting quietly for its time. The sky was deep violet, the lake rippling with faint reflections of light. Vu looked more serious than usual. He ordered tea but didn't touch it. What's wrong? I asked gently. He sighed. Do you remember Vi's parents? They live in Dalat now. They've asked me to move there with Mun. They're getting old and they want her close. My heart tightened. And do you want to go? He looked down. Part of me does. Mun loves them. It would be a quieter life, simpler. But another part... He stopped, eyes meeting mine. Another part doesn't want to leave Hanoi, doesn't want to leave you. The air seemed to still between us. I looked away, my fingers tightening around the cup. Vu, I said softly, you've always made choices for others. For Mun, for V's memory, for your family. Maybe this time, you need to choose for yourself. I'm trying, he said. That's why I wanted your truth. If I stay, I want it to be for something real, not just comfort. I looked at him then, the man who had quietly walked into my life when I'd forgotten how to trust. His eyes were steady, but I could see the conflict in them. Vu, I said slowly, what we have is real, but I can't ask you to stay. Love that holds someone back isn't love. If your heart says to go, go. If it says to stay, I'll be here. Not as a promise, but as a place you can return to. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then he reached across the table, his hand covering mine. You always speak with grace, Chi, even when it hurts. It's because I've learned that love and loss often share the same voice, I whispered. He smiled faintly. Then pray that I'll have the courage to listen to the right one. That night, I walked home with the wind brushing my hair, thinking of how life has a way of testing us right when we start to believe we've healed. 2 weeks later, Vu and Mun left for Dalat. He had promised it would be temporary, just until things settle, he said. But I knew better than to cling to promises shaped by distance. Before leaving, he stopped by my apartment. Mun ran to hug me tightly, her arms wrapping around my waist. Auntie Chi, she said breathlessly, when I see the clouds in Dalat, I'll send them to you, too. I laughed through tears. Then I'll look for them every morning. When she ran back to the car, Vu turned to me. His eyes were soft, full of things words couldn't hold. I don't know how long I'll be gone, he said quietly. But whatever happens, thank you, Chi, for reminding me that love doesn't have to hurt. And thank you, I said, for teaching me that healing doesn't mean forgetting. He nodded once, then drove away. I watched until the car disappeared down the long street, the sound of the engine fading into the hum of the city. The wind lifted the edge of my scarf, carrying the faint scent of lilies from a nearby vendor. For the first time in years, I felt something familiar yet new, solitude that didn't ache. Days turned into weeks. I filled my hours with work, helping organize more scholarship programs. Sometimes, when the afternoon sun slanted through my office window, I'd think of Dalat, the cool mist, the sound of pine trees. I wondered if Mun was still sending clouds my way. Life went on quietly. But one night, as I was closing my laptop, a message appeared on my phone. Vu, Mun wants to show you something. He attached a photo. Mun standing on a hill, holding a paper kite. On it, she'd painted 3 figures holding hands beneath a wide blue sky. Beneath the image was a single caption. Da Lat sends love. I smiled. That kind of smile that starts slow but reaches deep. I typed back, tell her I caught it. It just landed on my balcony. Months passed. Winter returned again, and with it, another round of charity events. Work kept me busy, but every night I still lit a small candle for my father and whispered a short prayer. Not for love, but for peace. One evening, as I left the office, I noticed the city shimmering with tiny lights for the Lunar New Year. The streets were alive, children running, families laughing, vendors calling out joyfully. I walked among them, feeling the pulse of life all around me. And then, through the crowd, I saw him, Vu. He stood near a flower stall, holding a bundle of peach blossoms. For a heartbeat, I thought I was dreaming. But then he smiled. That same quiet, steady smile that once made the world feel safe again. Chi, he said softly when I reached him. I told myself I'd come back when I finally knew what I wanted. And I do. I swallowed, my heart thudding. You came back, he nodded. Dalat was peaceful, but every morning when Mun looked at the clouds, she'd ask if Auntie Chi could see them. And I realized peace means nothing if you can't share it. For a moment, the world seemed to still. The laughter, the lights, the hum of scooters fading into silence. What about your family? I asked. They understood, he said. They said Vi would have wanted me to live, not just survive. I looked at him, really looked, and saw not the man I once pitied, but someone who had walked through grief and come out whole. He took a small step closer. I don't want promises or labels, Chi. I just want to keep walking. With you, the way we began. I smiled through tears. You're late, you know, he chuckled softly. Then let me start catching up. He handed me the peach blossoms. The petals brushed my fingers. Delicate, alive, trembling in the wind. Later that night, we walked by the lake again. The water mirrored the glow of lanterns drifting slowly across its surface. Mun ran ahead, her laughter echoing like a song that refused to fade. Vu and I walked behind her, our hands brushing once, then finding each other naturally. No fireworks, no grand declarations, just two people finally learning that love doesn't need to be loud to be true. As we stood there, watching Mun release her lantern into the water, I whispered, do you think the people we've lost can see us? Vu smiled. If they can, I think they're finally at peace. I looked up at the sky, vast and full of stars, and whispered quietly, thank you, Dad, I'm home. The lantern drifted farther, its light small but unwavering, like every fragile piece of love that had survived the storms. And when Vu's hand tightened gently around mine, I realized that sometimes the greatest miracle is not finding love again, but being brave enough to open your heart when it returns. Spring came like a quiet apology after years of storms. Soft, hesitant, full of second chances. The city glowed with blossoms again. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and wet soil. Life had folded itself into something simple, something kind. Vu Mun and I had begun a new rhythm, not bound by labels, but grounded in care. We weren't a family by name, but by feeling. The kind that doesn't need a declaration to be real. Some evenings, we'd cook together in my small kitchen. Other nights, we'd sit by the window listening to the rain. Mun curled up between us, half asleep with a book in her lap. It wasn't perfection, but it was peace. And peace, I had learned, was rarer than love. One afternoon, I received a call from my sister, Van. Her voice was bright, but underneath it was the tremor of big news. Chi, she said, I've been offered a position at the hospital in Hue. It's a big opportunity, a research fellowship in cardiology, but it means I'll be away for at least 2 years. I was quiet for a moment. That's wonderful, I said finally, meaning it. Dad would be so proud. She hesitated. Will you be okay here? I smiled even though she couldn't see it. You've been taking care of others all your life, Van. It's time you let the world take care of you for a while. There was a pause, then a soft laugh. You always know what to say. After we hung up, I sat by the window, watching the afternoon light scatter across the city. For so long, I had measured life by what I'd lost. Now, I was learning to measure it by what remained. The steady, ordinary moments that made up quiet happiness. That evening, Vu stopped by after work with a bag of groceries. Mun wants to bake tonight, he said, smiling. Baking? I teased. Since when? Since she saw a video of cupcakes shaped like clouds. Mun peeked from behind him, grinning. They're called Heaven's Bites. We laughed, and soon the kitchen was a small, chaotic mess. Flour on our hands, sugar on the counter, laughter echoing off the tiled walls. For a moment, I felt like a child again, free and unguarded. When the cupcakes were done, Mun insisted we each take one and make a wish before eating. "What are you wishing for?" I asked. She pressed a finger to her lips. "If I tell, it won't come true." Vu looked at me over the flickering light of the candles, a smile playing at his lips. "Then let's just hope all three wishes find each other halfway." It was such a simple line, but it stayed with me long after Mun had gone to bed. A few weeks later, our foundation organized another charity trip, this time to a small coastal village still recovering from a recent storm. Vu offered to drive, and Mun came along, her backpack filled with crayons and storybooks to share with local children. The village was quiet but welcoming. We distributed school supplies, repaired a few damaged classrooms, and spent the afternoons with the children. That night, we stayed in a small guest house by the shore. The sea outside was calm, moonlight spilling like liquid silver across its surface. Vu and I sat on the porch after everyone had gone to bed. The air smelled of salt and hibiscus. "She's growing fast," I said, nodding toward the room where Mun slept. He smiled softly. "Every time she laughs, I hear her mother in it, but lately, I hear you too." His words caught me off guard. "Vu," he turned to face me. "Don't worry, Chi. I'm not trying to replace what's gone. I just think love changes shape. It doesn't disappear. It finds new ways to exist." I looked out toward the sea, my voice quiet. "And what shape has it taken now?" He was silent for a moment, then said, "You." The wind carried the words away almost as soon as he said them, but their warmth stayed. We didn't speak for a while. There was no need to. The sea filled the silence for us, endless, forgiving. The next morning, we joined the villagers to plant mangroves along the shore. Small green shoots that would one day grow into roots strong enough to hold the earth together. As I pressed one into the soil, I thought about my own roots. How far they had spread, how deeply they'd been tested. Later, as the sun rose higher, Mun ran up with a seashell in her hand. "Auntie Chi, look, it sounds like the ocean." I pressed it to my ear, smiling. "It does." "Keep it," she said, sobbing. "So when you miss the sea, you can still hear it." I looked at her, the girl who had once been so quiet, now bright and fearless. "Thank you, Mun." She grinned. "Daddy says you're the reason we learned to smile again." I glanced at Vu, who stood a few meters away, watching us. He didn't speak, but in his eyes was a gratitude words could never carry. When we returned to Hanoi, life resumed its gentle rhythm. Van left for Hugh with tearful hugs and promises to call. Vu continued his projects, and I threw myself into mine. But somehow, our paths always found their way back to each other. One Sunday evening, as we sat by the lake, Vu turned to me suddenly. "Chi, there's something I've been meaning to ask." I looked up curious. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. "It's not a proposal," he said quickly, smiling when he saw my startled expression. "At least not in the usual way." Inside was a silver ring, simple and elegant, engraved with 3 small initials, V.C.M. "It's a symbol," he said, "for the family we became without even realizing it, for the life we built, quietly, honestly." Tears blurred my vision. "Vu, I don't need papers or promises," he said gently. "Just your yes, to keep walking together." I nodded, unable to speak. My yes came in the form of tears, of laughter breaking through them, of my hand finding his. Mun squealed when she saw the ring later. "Does this mean we're officially a team now?" "Yes," I said, smiling, "it's a team VC." She clapped her hands. "Then we need a team song," Vu chuckled. "You can write it, Captain." And so, in that tiny apartment filled with laughter, we began the next chapter. Not perfect, not grand, but ours. Months later, as summer returned, we took a trip to my hometown. My mother, now older and gentler with time, welcomed us with open arms. She pulled Vu aside at dinner and said quietly, "Take care of her. She's strong, but her heart bruises easily." "I know," he replied softly. "That's why I'm careful where I hold it." That night, I sat by my father's grave, the moonlight spilling across the stone. I placed fresh lilies there and whispered, "Dad, I kept my promise. Not the one to marry, but the one to live, to find someone who understands my silence." The breeze that passed through the trees felt almost like a hand on my shoulders, gentle, approving. On the way back, Mun dozed off in the back seat, her head resting on a pillow. Vu drove with one hand, the other reaching for mine across the console. The road stretched ahead, endless and golden beneath the sunset. I leaned my head against the window, feeling the hum of the car, the warmth of his touch, the soft rhythm of a life finally in tune with itself. And I thought, this is what peace sounds like. No grand gestures, no dramatic endings. Just the quiet, steady pulse of love. Rebuilt, reborn, renewed. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you, life, for giving me back my own heart." Outside, the last light of the day slipped behind the hills, and the road ahead glowed with promise. Wide open, waiting.